capital.
Certainly, we should be able to get by noon.
Yeah, that's like sitting normal, like, yeah.
Exactly.
The dinner? It's informed. Relatively. That's a good idea. Yeah. Let's see.
Sorry, I don't know.
Who's upstairs? She'll be down. What?
Should we start?
We should start.
Okay.
Yes.
Good afternoon, everyone. This is the City Planning Commission Review Session, and a quorum is present. Today is Monday, May 18th, 2015. We're going to take the first two items together. They involve 357 and 359 Canal Street. They're adjacent buildings requesting the same action, which is a proposed special permit to facilitate retail development. And our presenter is Sylvia.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. These are two private applications by the same applicant, Canal Associates LP, requesting the grant of special permits pursuant to Section 74-781 of the zoning resolution to allow use group 6 retail use on portions of the ground floor and cellar in two existing 5-story buildings located at 357 and 359 Canal Street within an MO5B zoning district and Soho Cast-Iron Historic District, Manhattan Community District 2. As shown on the area map, here's the two sites. They abut each other and are located in the northwest corner of Canal Street and Worcester Street. Since the sites are within an M15B district, use group 6 retail use is not permitted as of right below the level of second story. The project sites are located in the southern edge of the Soho neighborhood and to the north of Tribeca. The surrounding area is predominantly mixed use, where many of the buildings contain retail uses on ground floors and commercial light manufacturing uses or dwelling units on upper floors. Specifically, the buildings surrounding the project sites range from 4 to 7 stories in height, and many of them are mixed-use buildings. Retail storefronts are prevalent on both sides of Canal Street, West Broadway, and Grand Street. North of the site, along Worcester Street and West Broadway, some buildings have retail stores or art galleries on the ground floors. To the south of the site in Tribeca, many buildings contain retail or eating and drinking establishments on the ground floors. The zoning lot of 357 Canal Street measures about 1,100 square feet with about 23 feet of frontage on Canal Street and 72 feet on Worcester Street. And the building section is at the corner lot, and the building section is the one on your left. The zoning lot of 359 Canal Street measures approximately 1,300 square feet with about 18 feet of frontage on Canal Street. Sorry. The applicant is proposing almost identical actions for both buildings. As you can see, the ground floor of the two buildings, both the ground floor and cellar, would be used for use group 6 retail use. And upper floors are occupied by IMD currently, and they will remain the same. And the bulk of the buildings will be unchanged. Section 74-781 allows the Commission to modify the use regulations in M15B zoning district to allow use group 6 retail use below the level of the second story, provided that certain findings regarding the owner's good faith marketing efforts could be made. For buildings over 36,000 square feet, 3,600 square feet, such marketing period is required to be no less than 6 months. Between January 2013 and February 2014, for a period of over a year, the applicant actively pursued good faith marketing efforts to rent the ground floor and cellar space for as-of-right service and industrial uses at a rate of $80 per square foot. According to the applicant, as of April 2015, when the applications were filed, no inquiries for the marketed uses had been received. A more detailed documentation of such marketing efforts are provided in the applicant's statement findings in your packages.
Thank you, Sylvia. Questions for Sylvia? Mr. Knuckles.
Do you know the prevailing market rate for similarly situated commercial spaces?
You mean retail spaces?
Retail spaces, yes.
The management company provided a figure for that. It's about $150 per square foot on Canal Street, in that location.
Thank you.
Any other questions for Sylvia?
Just to clarify.
Yes.
But they marketed it at $80 per foot.
For manufacturing uses.
Right. And so the 150 was for retail.
Yeah, that's for retail. Yeah.
So they did what they were supposed to do according in order to meet the findings.
Right. Usually, yes. Usually, DCP, our staff would recommend, would talk with the applicant and come up with a price that is suitable for the as-of-right uses.
And that was in consultation with our staff.
Right.
Right. Thank you.
Any other questions for Sylvia? If not, both of these items are certified. 357 and 359 Canal. Thank you, Sylvia.
Sylvia also has the next item. On item number 3, page 69, it's also a proposed special permit to facilitate retail development, but along 449 Broadway. We're at item number 3, page 69.
I apologize if the presentation is a little repetitive. This is a private application by 449 Broadway LLC requesting the grant of special permit pursuant to Section 74-781 of the zoning resolution to allow use group 6 retail use on portions of the ground floor and cellar in an existing 5-story building located at 449 Broadway within an M15B zoning district in Soho, Cast Iron Historic District, Manhattan Community District 2. Shown the area map, the site is a through lot between Mercer Street and Broadway, between Grand Street and Howard Street. The site is within M15B zoning district, therefore use group 6 retail use is not permitted as of right below the level of second floor. Once the primarily manufacturing neighborhood, the surrounding Soho neighborhood has evolved into a mixed-use district where many of the buildings contain retail uses on the ground floor and commercial light manufacturing uses with dwelling units on upper floors. Specifically, as shown in these photos, along Broadway, Grand, Mercer, and Howard Streets, buildings are typically 4 to 8-story loft buildings, The ground floor of many of these buildings are occupied by retail establishments. Broadway and Canal Street, in particular, serve as local and regional shopping strips. The zoning law measures about 5,000 square feet with 25 feet of frontage on both sides. The site is improved with a 5-story building, which was built in mid-19th century. According to the historic documents provided by the applicant, the building was originally built to accommodate a store and had a storefront on the ground floor historically. Currently, the upper floors of the building are occupied by Use Group 6 offices, while the ground floor and the cellar have been vacant since 2010. The applicant now proposes to use about 4,200 square feet of zoning floor area on the ground floor and about 5,000 square feet in the cellar for Use Group 6 retail use. Office uses will remain on upper floors. The building's bulk will also remain unchanged. Section 74-781 allows the Commission to modify the use regulations in the M15B district to allow Use Group 6 retail below the level of second story. For a building over 3,600 square feet, such marketing period is required to be no less than a year. The applicant pursued good faith marketing efforts between January 2013 and February 2014 and marketed the ground floor and cellar space for as-of-right service industrial uses at a rate of $80 per square foot. According to the applicant, as of April 2015, no inquiries for marketed uses were received. A more detailed documentation of such efforts is provided in your packages.
Thank you, Sylvia. As you can see, this is dramatically different from the first two items. Any questions for Sylvia on this? Mr. Dwyer?
Just a comment. I mean, this brings us back to the bigger topic of a area-wide rezoning. Obviously, the use groups that are allowed right now are not conforming with what's actually there. I remember sitting on the IDA board, and Barry was with me, I think, when the city spent some money and investment in bringing Bloomingdale's retail down there. So we're part of the reason, the city is part of the reason that area is cultivated as a shopping area, and I think that, we keep on seeing these applications. It's a time for just a broader review of what could be done in that area.
Well, I will say, as you've heard before, we are committed to studying Soho, NoHo rezoning. We've had a number of knotty issues, retail and ground floor uses being but one, others that we will see today even being others. It's just a question right now of resources in the Manhattan office to look at this, but we are committed to looking at it. Ms. Efron.
I just urge the Commission to look at page 95, which is a lovely graphic map by Ripco of all of the retail uses in that area. It looks as if there are no industrial uses, and I would amplify Commissioner Dweck's comments and say that it creates an illusion that there's plenty of manufacturing space around because we have so many M-zone spaces that aren't in fact affordable for any manufacturer. I'm hard-pressed to imagine a manufacturer paying $80 a square foot anywhere, and I mean anywhere, forgetting about Manhattan, even in London, for manufacturing space. There's just an imbalance of what we have on our books historically as manufacturing space and what's actually available, affordable, usable space to create more employment in manufacturing.
I would just say I don't think there's any question that at least in terms of ground floor uses, the character of Soho, NoHo has changed dramatically, and it is not only dominant, the land use is not only dominant as retail, but it's basically a retail mecca. So I think the issue is really size, kinds of stores and the like, at least with respect to retail, and there are variety of different views on that, ranging from allowing stores of a larger size to limiting stores, the size of stores and the like. And that's just one aspect of a fairly complicated review of this complicated zoning scheme that I think all of us would agree needs refreshment. So, but with that, unless there are other questions, we will certify this.
Thanks, Sylvia.
Thank you, Sylvia.
Thank you.
Let's move to item number 4. It's our first pre-hearing project of the day. It's a Manhattan pre-hearing application with respect to a proposed notice of intent to acquire office space for the NYPD newly created Federal Monitor and Inspector General offices. And our presenter is Jamie. We're on item number 4, page 105.
Good afternoon. This application is for 375 Pearl Street. The applicant, the Department of Citywide Administrative Services, proposes to acquire 18,000 square feet of office space on a portion of the 22nd floor of a building at 375 Pearl Street in order to facilitate the move of the New York City Police Department's offices for the newly formed Federal Monitor and Inspector General positions and their supporting staff. These newly formed units aim to enhance the effectiveness of the police department, increase public safety, protect civil liberties and civil rights, and increase the public's confidence in the police force, thus building stronger police-community relations. The units recently moved into their temporary office space at 100 Center Street. However, this space is not suitable long-term due to its small size. 375 Pearl Street is located on the west side of Pearl Street, just right here. This is their proposed site, and this is their temporary site located right here. Their proposed site is located on Pearl Street between Madison Street and between Pearl Street and Avenue of the Finest within the C64 zoning district. Surrounding land uses are characterized by a mix of high-density mixed-use, commercial uses, residential uses, office buildings, and public facility and institutional uses. The project is also located 1 block from One Police Plaza. The building is located on a wide street of a major corridor, as you can see here, and it's adjacent to the Brooklyn Bridge, which is located right here. The proposed office space will be located on the 22nd floor within a 32-story, 800,000 square foot building. The building is currently redeveloped into a mix of office and data center uses. NYPD proposes to have 6 different groups locate along with these 2 newly formed units to support the Federal Monitor and the Inspector General that include the General Counsel, Investigation Unit, Compliance Division, Data Integrity Unit, Risk Mitigation Unit, and Performance Analysis Section. There will be approximately 50 uniformed and 35 civilian staff. Hours of operation will vary between the different units, but in general, hours of operation will be Monday to Friday from 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. Access for a possible week of coverage is needed, and 24/7 access to the building is required. There are no department vehicles assigned to this unit, and employees driving to work will park at the police headquarters. The proposed site will include offices, conference room, a reception, waiting area, locker rooms, a pantry, and approximately 70 workstations. The requested action, notice of intent to acquire office space, is pursuant to Section 195 of the New York City Charter and will facilitate the relocation of NYPD's offices for the newly formed Federal Monitor and Inspector General positions and the supporting staff for the proposed location located at 375 Pearl Street.
Thank you. Questions? Any questions? Ms. Delos?
Are we actually expecting anyone to come and testify Or who are we expecting to come testify on Wednesday?
DCAS will be at the public hearing as well as NYPD, but no one else.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, thank you, Jamie.
Thank you.
Jamie also has our next item. It's also a Manhattan pre-hearing application with respect to a notice of intent to acquire office space for the relocated NYPD World Trade Center Command Substation. We're now on item number 5, page 112.
This application is for 90 West Street. The application Department of Citywide Administrative Services proposes to acquire 3,000 square feet of office space on a portion of the ground floor building located at 90 West Street in order to facilitate the relocation of New York Police Department's World Trade Center Command Substation in Lower Manhattan. The World Trade Center Command Substation is currently located at 130 Cedar Street. As you can see here, it's very close by. And the landlord does not wish to extend their current lease, which ends January 1st, 2016. 90 West is located on the east side of West Street between Albany Street and Cedar Street within the C69 zoning district of the Special Lower Manhattan District. High-density commercial office buildings to the north, as well as mixed-use residential and commercial buildings to the west characterize the surrounding land uses. The building is also located on a wide street of a major corridor to the west, and the project is just south of the World Trade Center site. The proposed office space will be located on the ground floor within a 23-story, 360,000 square feet residential rental building. The Landmarks Preservation Commission has designated the exterior as an architectural landmark in 1996. The World Trade Center Command Substation provides a counterterrorism unit for NYPD, and the proposed site will act as a command center for the counterterrorism division. The site will operate largely as an administrative office for meetings and conferences, interviews, and monitoring of security cameras. The built-out space will have a waiting area, conference room, a command room, restroom, and a breakout area for the police officers. 6 civilian employees are expected to be at site, in addition to approximately 40 NYPD officers per shift. Arrests will continue to be processed at the one precinct location at 16 Erickson Place. The site will be in operation 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. The requested action, notice of intent to acquire office space, is pursuant to Section 195 of the New York City Charter and would facilitate the relocation of NYPD's World Trade Center Command Substation to the proposed location at 90 West Street.
Thank you, Jamie. Questions? Mr. Dweck.
The question, I noticed that they're taking ground floor space, and it
Yes.
seems like it's primarily offices, so I think we can get some clarification, perhaps it would be less expensive to move floor up, or why they're taking that particular spot.
Well, the building is currently residential, so the ground floor is the only space in that building that they can occupy. Mm-hmm.
But there's no tactical advantage for them having ground floor space.
That NYPD would probably be able to answer your question at the public hearing for that. Yeah.
I would note it's sort of the entryway to the World Trade Center Memorial, to the memorial, and strategically, it's a good location. Not that I can speak for the PD. Ms. Efron.
Just a quick question.
Sure.
Was the substation previously located in a residential building?
That I'm not sure if 130 Cedar Street was strictly residential. According to the zoning map, it was commercial office. I don't believe there was residential, but I could check.
It would be great if
Yeah,
somebody
I
from
can
the police
verify
department could
that.
just talk about how substations or police stations in residential buildings function, since this is a pretty large one.
Yeah, this is a rental building or a condo?
Yes, it's a rental building. Mm-hmm.
And my guess is that the residents of this building are of mixed views on this. On the one hand, it provides
And NYPD has gone to the residential building and informed them of the use.
It is.
Yeah.
It was
This
the
is
athletic
actually,
club or one of
this
those.
is actually quite a beautiful
Beautiful
Cass
building.
Gilbert building. Yeah, it was an office building prior to the
Prior to residential.
1990s and suffered a lot during, as a result of 9/11. But yes, Ms. Levin.
Actually, the previous conversations raised two questions in my mind. These public reviews have a very short fuse. Has the community board been notified that this is in the works, and do we expect to hear from the community board on
Yes.
Wednesday?
Yes, the community board does know about both of these projects, and NYPD as well as DCAS, they went to the community board to inform them about the projects, and we don't expect them to attend the public hearing on Wednesday.
Okay. And then the fact that it is on the ground floor in what would, I guess, otherwise be retail space, it raises the question about the streetscape experience. What will the window treatments be like? Will this be for a pedestrian walking by? Is this a blank wall? Will they darken the window, frost the windows, or will you be able to see some activity? Will it have the kind of street vitality that we like to see in retail space?
That's a good question. The window treatments haven't been looked into further, but that's something that we can ask the applicant and get back to you on.
Thank you.
And again, I'd say my experience with police department occupying ground floor space is that it is not transparent for security reasons. That said, this is, again, a very sort of active location because it's the entryway into the memorial.
Well, but there are ways that you can make opaque windows to satisfy the needs of the tenant inside while still not making it completely awful for passersby.
Any other questions for Jamie? So the PD will be here as well as
As well as DCAS.
DCAS? Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Let's now move to item number 6, page 118. It's a several actions, proposed special permit and CPC certification to facilitate an expansion to the hospital for special surgery. Manhattan pre-hearing action. We're on item number 6, page 118, and Stephen is our presenter.
Good afternoon, Chairman and Commissioners. This is an application by a hospital for special surgery for a special permit pursuant to zoning resolution section 74682, development over streets to allow for an increase in the permitted lot coverage of HSS's main campus by 2,820 square feet, and for approval by the City Planning Commission under the 1973 agreement between the City of New York, HSS, New York Presbyterian Hospital, and Rockefeller University to allow for development in the demapped airspace over the former East 70th Street. These actions will allow for an addition to the HSS's West Wing building located at 535 East 70th Street to be enlarged by 7,930 square feet of floor area plus mechanical space. The application was certified on May 30th and is coming back to the Commission for pre-hearing review. I'll take you through an abbreviated overview and then proceed through the Community Board and BP recommendations. As you can see from our maps up here, HSS is located in Manhattan's Upper East Side in an R9 district, with its main hospital buildings located between York Avenue and FDR Drive, including over FDR Drive, and between former East 70th Street and East 72nd Street within the coastal zone boundary. HSS in the far map is in light blue at the northern area there. It's on the northern end of a larger hospital district, sometimes referred to as Eds and Meds or Bedpan Alley. You can see Presbyterian Hospital there, Rockefeller University. They have many affiliations between each other. So in 1971, New York State adopted legislation authorizing the city to close and discontinue airspace above FDR Drive and some adjacent streets for the purpose of allowing expansion for HSS, Presbyterian, and Rockefeller. So in order to implement the 71 legislation, the CPC and the Board of Estimate approved the demapping of airspace and also approved the agreement between the three institutions and the city in 1973. The 1973 agreement outlined the conditions and procedures by which the institutions could develop this space, the airspace above the FDR Drive and on the adjacent streets. So the action pertains to the main hospital building, which is the east and west building, which you can see right here in this drawing. This is the west wing, and this is the east wing, which is over FDR Drive. The development site is located in approximately 77,000 square foot zoning lot. Up to 412,260 square feet of floor area is permitted on the development site, and the total existing floor area is 396,176 square feet, and the proposed enlargement would result in a total of 404,106 square feet of zoning. As of right, the total permitted lot coverage would be 50,082 square feet. The approved lot coverage is 55,820 square feet, and the proposed total coverage with this project would be 58,640 square feet. So these are the waiver boards here. The expansion would begin at the third floor, which is located right here, and go up to a total of 4 floors, including a mechanical floor. The expansion will allow HSS to increase the number of surgeries they are able to perform annually by about 2,500. The proposed enlargement would extend 22 feet over the service ramp that replaced former East 70th Street and would extend for a length of 128 feet with a clear height of 14 feet. We have an illustration here of the proposed addition. This is right here. Here's the ramp going up to the loading area. This is the addition, 4, 5, 6, 7. 4 total floors. So to facilitate the proposed project, 2 actions by the City Planning Commission are required. First, a special permit under Section 74-682 is required to modify the maximum percentage of lot coverage set forth in Section 2411 in order to allow for an increase of lot coverage on the development site by the additional 2,820 square feet. The second action is related to the 73 agreement, paragraph E of Exhibit H, namely that such construction will not substantially interfere with the vehicular and pedestrian use of the FDR Drive or the streets, and that such construction shall be in accordance with the provisions of the agreement. So moving on to the Community Board and Borough President recommendations on April 15, 2015, Community Board 8 approved the application by a vote of 33 in favor, 0 opposed, and no abstentions. And we have not yet received a formal recommendation from the Manhattan Borough President Office yet, but I had an email exchange with them this morning, and they confirmed their intention of approving the application without any conditions.
Thank you, Stephen. Any questions?
Just very quick.
Absolutely, Ms. Delos,
I just want to confirm, did you say 2,500 additional surgeries per year would be able to be performed?
2,500.
That's quite a few for such a small addition.
Yeah.
Thanks.
I think it's mainly the operating rooms that there's mechanical floor on top, but it's focused on the operating room.
Any other questions for Stephen? Who will be here on Wednesday?
A vice president of HSS will be attending and can speak to any questions, and a representative of Fried Frank will be here. And they are already here.
The Melanie Myers will actually be here? Herself? Wow.
Perhaps Wesley O'Brien, ex-city planning.
Thank you, Stephen. Thank you.
Let's now move to item number 7, page 179. It's also a Manhattan pre-hearing application with respect to an urban development action area project designation, project approval, disposition of city-owned property, and a zoning map amendment to facilitate a mixed-use building with approximately 179 affordable units to be located on First Avenue and East 120th Street in Manhattan. We're on item number 7, page 179, and Beverly is our presenter.
I gonna get bumped, sorry, overbooked. We can give you a free flight next
I
time.
was just going to say that. Anybody like to give up their surgery for a free surgery?
Good afternoon, Commission members, Chairman Weisbrod. This application is back for pre-hearing review. HPD is requesting UDAP designation and project approval, the disposition of city-owned property, and a zoning map amendment for a site located on the east side of First Avenue and East 120th Street. The site is currently situated in a R72 zoning district. The requested zoning map amendment would change the district to an R7X with a C15 commercial overlay along First Avenue. If the requested actions are approved, they would facilitate the development of a 12-story mixed-use building with 179 units of affordable housing, 5,450 square feet of ground floor retail space, 3,920 square feet of community facility space, 27 at-grade parking spaces which would be partially decked over to provide 9,410 square feet of private open space. Currently on site along First Avenue is a surface parking lot with 75 cars and a one-story vacant building. Under the current proposal, the one-story vacant building would be demolished to make way for the proposed development. The surrounding area has a general land use pattern that reflects low and medium density residential development, mixed-use buildings, commercial buildings, and institutional buildings. The Wagner Houses, a NYCHA public housing development, occupies the same block as the proposed site, as well as on the west side of First Avenue. The surrounding area is predominantly R72, which allows a maximum residential FAR of 3.44, a maximum commercial FAR of 2.0, and a maximum community facility FAR of 6.5. The area to the south of the site includes contextual districts, R7A, R7B, and R7X with a C15 commercial overlay. The R7X with the C15 commercial overlay is mapped along First Avenue between East 114th Street to the south side of East 120th Street. The requested zoning map amendment would extend the R7X with the C15 commercial overlay 180 feet along First Avenue and 200 feet into East 120th Street. The proposed R7X district requires a building base height of 60 to 85 feet before requiring a setback of 10 feet before rising to a maximum height of 125 feet. The proposed development would consist of a 12-story L-shaped building with a height of 121 feet and 4 inches, and it would achieve an FAR of 4.98. The building would contain 175 units of affordable housing, the majority of which would be affordable to individuals earning 60% of the AMI. The apartment distribution would be 37 studio apartments, 48 one-bedrooms, 91 two-bedrooms, and 3 three-bedrooms. The residential entrance would be on East 120th Street. The ground floor commercial space would have 2 entrances, one on 120th and one on First Avenue. And the community facility space will also have an entrance on First Avenue. time of certification, there were several questions raised about the parking lot. The curb cut would be 12 feet wide, and the parking lot would only have access and egress on East 120th Street. There would only be one car at a time, either coming in or going out, and the roll-down grill security gate will be operated by remote control. Of course, this is the entrance. It's outlined in red. This is the circulation pattern behind that grill. So there will be 17 covered spaces, which would be under the decked-over open space, and there would be 10 uncovered spaces, which would be contiguous to the covered spaces. All the parking would be at grade. I also have for you the northern elevation and the western elevation, so you can get an idea of what the tenants would be looking at, the 90 tenants. This is the northern elevation, they'd be looking south. This is the base of the private open space, right behind this wall. And this is what they would be looking at from the west side of First Avenue, and this is actually the front of the building. The Community Board held a public hearing on this project on March 17th, and by a vote of 33 in favor with 0 against and 2 abstentions, voted to approve the project without conditions. The Borough President submitted a recommendation on May 13, 2015, to approve the project with 2 conditions: that the final project provide community facility space in excess of 4,200 square feet, and that HPD submit language for a deed restriction that would require that the community facility space be occupied by a not-for-profit social service organization at a below-market rent as stipulated by the June 8, 2009 HRA letter.
Thank you, Beverly. Questions? Ms. Efron?
With the Borough President's recommendation, would that reduce the amount of square footage available for the retail?
No, it will not.
Okay, thank you.
Ms. Levin?
Yeah, Beverly, there was a sentence that disappeared from the briefing sheet between certification and now, that sort of raised a question about the various parties who are involved here. Because the briefing sheet we got back in February, I guess it was, said that it was the East Harlem Council for Community Improvement that was selected to develop the site, but that sentence is not there anymore. So who is the developer here? I understand that there are a number of organizations that are cooperating on this project. But who's the developer? What's their experience in building affordable housing? Who will operate it? Who will use the community facility space? You may not have the answers, but
I don't have
putting
it
them
right in
out there
front
as
of me.
questions for Wednesday.
Yes. Okay. There are a group of players. Promesa is a player. The HDFC is a manager. Various components. I don't recall right off.
I hope the testimony on Wednesday will give us a clear understanding of who the organizations are, who's going to be doing what, and
Yes.
some security that it's going to be well-built and well-managed.
Yes.
And that's obviously a question that HPD will address on Wednesday and should.
Good.
Mr. Marin?
Beverly, could you just go over the unit breakdown again? I wasn't,
Okay.
I was trying to concentrate on the AMI.
Okay. That's page 5 of my note. "37 studio apartments, 48 one-bedroom apartments, 91 two-bedroom apartments, and 3 three-bedroom apartments. And that includes 1 for a superintendent.
Ms. Elwood?
Can you just confirm that this is permanently affordable? Because in the Borough President's recommendation, I think she says that, but I'm not so sure I saw that elsewhere.
I will have to find that
I
out.
think that's a question to be addressed to HPD. My guess is
It's
not
a-
necessarily, since this is presumably proceeding through HPD subsidy, but a question for sure to HPD, albeit that the affordability will go on for quite a long time, but not necessarily permanent. I would just add that in light of our various presentations by DIFTA and by ACS, our esteemed secretary, Ms. Harris, has already reached out to DIFTA and to ACS and made them aware that this potentially is available as community facility space that could be used for those kinds of uses. And I think we'll be doing that as a regular matter of regular course of business. So I thank you, Jackie, for doing that.
Actually, Mr. Chairman prompted me. He's being so gracious.
No,
I
I didn't.
deeply appreciate it.
No, Jackie actually did it. Any other questions for Beverly? Thank you, Beverly.
Thank you.
Thanks, Beth. Now let's move to item number 8, page 207. It's a Queens pre-hearing application with respect to the proposed disposition of city-owned property to facilitate an enlargement to an existing company serving the aerospace industry. Our presenter is Fred. We're on item number 8, Queens pre-hearing action, page 207.
Good afternoon, Commissioners and Chairman Weisbrod. This is a return to the Commission prior to public hearing. The application by DCAS seeks the disposition of a city-owned property located at 120-22 28th Avenue to facilitate the enlargement of a manufacturing facility, an existing manufacturing facility, to lots 60 currently controlled and owned by EDC, and the northern portion of Lot 1 here, which is the city lot subject to this application. The land of sale is within the Special College Point District. The city intends to dispose of the property to the New York City Land Development Corporation, which in turn intends to dispose of the property to EDC, which in turn tends to subsequent disposition to Biogea Holdings, the owner of the current property occupied by S&L Aerospace Metals. The purpose of the development of Lot 1 is to expand the S&L Aerospace facility with a 24,000 square foot building. The application was certified by the Commission on February 17, 2015. On April 13th, Community Board 7 held a public hearing that was represented by staff from EDC, who presented drawings of the S&L Aerospace Metals building that would be built in the northern portion of Lot 1. This lot was previously occupied by Co-Fire Asphalt. The current disposition is part of a land swap that dates back to 2010. As part of the agreement, Co-Fire, that previously owned the property, promised to clean up the site in compliance with city and state environmental regulations. These requirements would be recorded in the deed. The promises were not kept. As a result of the failure to meet site environmental remediation requirements, and after a 5-year time period, the Community Board voted to deny the application on April 13th, 2015. The Queensborough president had a hearing on this application, and there was a presentation by EDC. At the borough president's land use public hearing, a representative from DEC stated there would have to be a re-evaluation of the current status and the extent of the oil spill that occurred when Co-Fire had control and use of the property. The DEC representative stated there were more areas that must be reviewed and considered for contamination remediation. The affected council member sent a statement that he does not support this application unless EDC, DEC, and Co-Fire give assurances that all necessary environmental remediation has been accomplished. The Queensborough president fully supports the efforts by S&L Aerospace to expand their operations with their construction of a 24,000 square foot building. However, as the unresolved remediation issues are extremely problematic, the borough president recommended the disapproval of the application until the environmental issues are addressed within a clear timetable to meet the requirements outlined and approved by the New York State DEC. Are there any questions?
Thank you, Fred. Questions?
Yes, sir.
Mr. Vice Chairman.
That would be me.
That would be you.
Fred, over and above the environmental issues, which are significant, do you know whether or not new jobs will be created as a result of this expansion?
Yes.
And so how many?
We do know that. With the new expansion of S&L, we'll be creating between 20 and 25 new full-time positions.
Thank you.
Ms. Levin.
So, Fred, could you just point to us on the map? So Co-Fire had an asphalt plant on,
They still occupy the southern part.
so they had the entire thing.
They had originally they had the entire two-thirds of these lots.
Okay, and then the terms of the swap were what? That they would relocate to,
Relocate to this position and, most importantly, do the site remediation, including the cleanup for the petroleum underground tank that had spilled. And they have been dragging their heels on it and not accomplished this in the period of 5 years.
and is there any likelihood that they actually will do this? Is the city working with Co-Fire to get it done?
That's way beyond my,
Okay, maybe we'll hear more on Wednesday, and I guess the follow-up question would be, is S&L aware of this, or the Bojai Holding aware of this? What's their plan for remediation? Obviously, before anything gets built over that piece of property.
I believe that's a very pertinent question, and I think EDC and Baugia S&L will probably be testifying, hopefully, to address that.
Okay, but the asphalt plant now is on that lower right-hand quadrant of the block. They're making asphalt, the city's buying the asphalt.
They are getting new equipment in to make cleaner asphalt.
So are they not making asphalt at the moment?
I don't-
We don't know, okay.
Mr. Cantor.
Thank you. Fred, you referred to, when you made the comment that if they kept the facility the way they're going and they agreed to do an upgrade in terms of environment, with a promise to fulfill their commitment, I would question whether a promise is sufficient. Do we have the ability to put language in that nothing happens until there is a clearance of the ground?
Well, in 5 years.
We've had 5 years already. Are you saying it's gonna take 5 years more?
Well, but presumably,
Is that intent to build within the next 5 years?
presumably EDC will be here to testify on Wednesday, as will S&L.
I hope I don't.
So I would hope, Ms. Cantor, those are real questions to EDC to see.
I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Do we know when 5 years ago, what concessions were made to S&L at that time regarding the parcel? Did they get financial benefits that in effect they're now giving up if the city takes it back? VDC takes it back?
I don't believe that S&L was involved in the agreement 5 years ago. I may be wrong.
Okay.
It's Co-Fire where the agreements were made.
Okay, thank you.
Ms. Deluz.
Fred, in the community board memo, there's reference to a meeting with state elected officials on March 27th. I'm just wondering if there's any more information about that. Maybe someone at the hearing could provide more information about that that meeting if you don't have it. And I'm just wondering if we expect anybody from New York State Department of Environmental Conservation to be here to speak to things. No, just that. Since they might have more information that's relevant.
Ms. Efron.
Thanks. In that same memo from Jean Kelty of Community Board 7, there's a claim that Co-Fire is in bankruptcy proceeding. Could we get some clarification on what the status of that bankruptcy is? I would imagine the requirement to clean up what they left behind goes on despite a bankruptcy, but who actually owns the land right now and what the status is would be useful.
Also an excellent question.
Just want to note that a representative from EDC, who will likely be our speaker on Wednesday, is present in the audience.
And I also have, do you know, Fred, whether there is an outstanding DEC order with respect to the timeliness of when remediation efforts have to be made?
In my understanding, there are DEC remediation implementations, but there's no timetable.
I'm sorry, I didn't
No
hear.
timetable
Did you
for
say remediation efforts or mediation efforts?
remediation efforts for the spill and other issues relating to the site? I don't believe that there was any timetable established.
And consequently, no DEC order requiring exactly what had to be done and when, as far as you know? And there is, I think, a reference that somewhere, but it's not from DEC, that, or it's hearsay, that DEC says Co-Fire has been proceeding in good faith, but could you find out between now and Wednesday whether DEC will put that in writing?
Certainly will.
And one final question, also with respect to DEC. Have there been any violations issued by DEC or by DEP or by any other enforcement agency regarding the contamination of the site in the last 5 years, as far as you know? And if so, have those violations been cleared?
May I just add one other possible? I'm just wondering also if the Mayor's Office of Environmental Quality has been involved at all in discussion of this site as well, because sometimes they are.
We did receive a sign-off by
Mark
not
McIntyre.
for our in-shop city planning environmental review.
That's different. Okay. I'm thinking Mark McIntyre's office. Okay.
Any other questions for Fred? And I do note that S&L is exactly the kind of manufacturing company we would like to see expand in the city. So the clash between economic development and I'm sure all of our desire to see S&L expand and environmental quality is especially disturbing. So.
Thank you, Commissioners. We will now move to the proposed council modifications. We have 4 of them. The first is the Vanderbilt corridor, which will be presented by Frank.
Do I have to leave? Do I have to leave at this point?
Yes.
I still do.
And Commissioner Cerullo is recused.
It is, okay.
It's only 40,000 square foot space, sorry. EDC can give them low interest money to do it, and we'll be done.
Change the password.
You have to input it 3 times. Good afternoon.
Frank.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. So the City Council Land Use Committee voted for a series of modifications to the Vanderbilt corridor and one Vanderbilt proposal. I'll go through them separately, starting with the Vanderbilt corridor, some modifications to each of the 3 special permits that are included in it, and then go more specifically really through the modifications of one Vanderbilt, particularly its ground floor and transit connections. To the text amendment, there were kind of changes to each of the 3 permits. One to the public realm improvement bonus, and the council included an additional finding, so those sites north of 43rd Street, so the 4 blocks north of the one Vanderbilt site. New finding would be applicable that would ask the CPC to consider the site characteristics of those sites, including things like the size of the zoning lot, the connections to the below-grade network, in order to determine the appropriate FAR for the sites beyond the transit improvements or the proposed amount of landmark transfer. The landmark transfer special permit, the actual requirement that was removed or is proposed to be removed as part of our action, the requirement for the public realm improvement was restored for landmark transfers with the addition that it could be waived by the CPC where the CPC believed it appropriate, or for proposals that included both the public realm improvement bonus and the landmark transfer special permit. I would note the findings for the sites north of 43rd Street would also be applicable for those using the landmark transfer special permit. And then lastly, for the hotel special permit, there was provision added for hotels that are damaged or destroyed by casualty. They would not be required to get a new special permit if it complies with the underlying floor area regulations. Any questions on those before I go through one Vanderbilt? Okay. One Vanderbilt, series of modifications
Just go back one
Sure.
second. So on the landmark transfer special permit, what in effect the council is proposing is to shift what had been
right.
An assumption that a transit improvement would not be required to an assumption that it would be required
That's
but
right.
could be waived. But then the net result of it is still within the commission's discretion to have a transit improvement or not have a transit improvement.
That's correct.
In the event that a landmarks transfer took place. Is that?
That's correct. Yes.
Frank, can I just ask a question?
Yeah.
About, wouldn't it be the case in any property that's damaged or destroyed because of casualty that it could be reconstructed without a special permit, or is this unique?
Well, it's for a hotel, right? So
Right, I
in this
understand.
instance, hotels, as part of this text amendment, as of right hotel use was limited
Right.
unless by a special permit. And so what this was doing is if a hotel, and particularly this is, I think, coming from testimony received from the Roosevelt, who already exists,
Yes,
if they were
harmed. in
damaged
some-
or destroyed,
Right.
they would they would then have to be a new use, and they would have then needed a new special permit to rebuild back. So this removes that requirement for that. So this really, it's,
I guess I was unaware that under those circumstances, you would still have to come back, so,
yeah.
okay.
But
Thank you.
only to the original FAR.
Only to, if, as long as they were building to under the permitted 15 FAR cap that's in the area.
Mr. Cantor?
Thank you. Isn't there a provision in the existing code where if the building is damaged or fire, whatever, like 65%, they have to comply with the current zoning as opposed to the zoning that
As long as 25% of, there's a provision that says that as long as 25% of the building remains 25, you can build back, effectively you can build back what you have. Here would be an instance where, imagine the entirety of the use was destroyed, rather than maintaining 25%. And they would be able to build back then. It's kind of beyond, to your point, Erwin, it's kind of beyond the normal course of action.
Yeah, okay. Fascinating.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay. On the One Vanderbilt proposal, there were a series of modifications to the ground floor and transit proposal. I'll go through them individually, and then some more limited modifications to some of the requirements of kind of the construction and design of the building. First, and what's shown on the left is the site plan that was approved as part of the A application. That was the last that the commission saw. And then on the right is the council's modified proposal. Particularly, the focus on the ground floor was the area on 42nd Street located at the transit entrance in the mid-block area. The proposal or the modifications by the council actually widen the entrance area on 42nd Street. The effect of this is it actually just kind of creates a larger entrance so that you have a more significant space. The way that the council described this was almost effectively as a second transit hall on the ground floor. Additionally, that space is actually on the level below. This is at what's called B1. That's the level where the main hall of Grand Central is. That connection that runs between the main hall area, east side, and down to the 42nd Street subway station, that area at 42nd Street is much more expanded and actually allows for greater connections at subway level with the rest of the network. The boon of that being that all of that additional space actually provides for an additional amount of sunlight actually entering into this portion of the station. This kind of really opens up this 42nd Street access. Down below, and this is kind of, it's hard to see in this, and I'll show a section of what the proposal is, but really modified the access from east side access up to 42nd Street. The original, and actually it's just probably easier to do this, the original proposal had east side access escalators coming up to the Grand Central level at B1, and then up or down if you were going to the subway. The modified proposal has an escalator that goes to the level of actually the subway station itself, and then from there, straight shot escalators that go up to street level. And this kind of provides a simplified access, particularly for east side access riders to the subway, and then really then to the street. So it makes for a simplified and kind of clearer path of access. Lastly, there were modifications. There was a requirement for a construction consultation committee with community to kind of go over the construction of the building. The transit hall design consultation, which included the borough president in the original approval, the council member was added to that process, and also the requirement that the building provide the commission with a sustainability report demonstrating how the building actually met its standards. The council member thought that was a good idea too and wanted to be included in the receiving of that report, and so that was added also. In summary, these are the changes to the One Vanderbilt and Vanderbilt corridor proposals. For the legal part, they are within scope, and we've provided a letter to be signed to go back to the council speaking of that point. Any other questions?
Thank you, Frank. Any other questions for Frank?
Just to say these are terrific improvements.
They are great improvements. I must say this was a textbook case of working cooperatively with the city council, and again, my personal thanks to and congratulations to both Edith and Frank and all the people here who have worked on this over the last century or so.
Since we built Grand Central.
Thank you.
Yes.
So with that, by a show of hands, I will entertain a motion that no further action is required on our part.
On both ends?
On both items.
Yes.
One Vanderbilt and the Vanderbilt corridor. Thank you very much, and congratulations to you both.
Thank you. Let's now go to the third proposed council modification. It involves special permits for 3941 West 23rd Street, and our presenter is Dominic. And I would ask that, Jim, if you could bring Commissioner Cerullo back in. Thanks, Mary.
Mr. Chairman, Vice Chairman, and Commissioners, good afternoon. Here to describe the proposed council modifications for 39-41 West 23rd Street. That was an application that was approved by City Planning Commission on March 30th. It's for two actions: facilitate a residential building to be constructed between 23rd and 24th Streets and between 5th and 6th Avenues in Manhattan. The actions were a special permit pursuant to Section 74.711 to allow modifications of use, street wall height, setback, sky exposure plane, and rear yard regulations to a building. And then also the other actions were for special permit for under Manhattan Core parking regulations pursuant to 13-451 for a parking facility within the building of 50 spaces. So the modification would be to the AMIs for the 4 affordable units. Although the affordable units were not part of the actions, the applicant had agreed to provide 4 units within the building, and it was going to be 2 units at 40% of AMI and 2 units at 80% of AMI, and this was described in the restrictive declaration. So this modification would be to modify the restrictive declaration so that the AMIs would be modified to 80% for 2 of the units and 130% for the other 2 units. And the staff has examined the proposed modifications and have determined that they're within scope and raise no land use or environmental issue requiring further review.
Any questions? Ms. Young.
Could you just give us a sense of what the conversation was that led to this modification?
I don't know. I wasn't part of that conversation.
So we don't know why they decided to make that change?
With respect to the AMIs?
Yeah.
I did have a conversation with the council member, and he felt that given the area and the needs of the area, higher AMIs were appropriate. That's all I can say. But it is within scope, and it doesn't provide any land use issues to us. And so, again, by a show of hands, I will entertain a motion that no further action on our part is required. So, thank you.
Thanks, Commissioners.
Thank you, Dominic.
Can I just add one thing, though? I'm just wondering if in the future, after some, especially as it relates to AMIs, I know that this is something that's come up at this community board as well for discussion, and I'm just wondering if we could get further clarification on that. And then I wonder if we would not have, or the city might not have asked for additional units at the time of negotiation if we knew that it was, if the AMI was going to change so dramatically. So that's just something to kind of keep in mind.
Yes, I'll say, as you may recall, this was a significantly contentious item. And presumably, as we move toward mandatory inclusionary zoning, this will become a more standardized approach. But this is not the first time. We've had several instances where the council, in its wisdom, has, particularly in Manhattan, has increased the AMIs for the affordable units.
Thank you.
Okay. The commissioner sent a letter to the city council on this one. You already did it.
Yeah,
Okay.
I still get it.
Thank you. So let's now move to our fourth proposed council modification. It involves the Cherry Hill Gourmet text amendment to facilitate the continued use of a food store. And our presenter is Richard.
Good afternoon, Chairman Weisbrod, Commissioners. On May 7, 2015, the Land Use Committee of the City Council recommended a modification of the City Planning Commission decision regarding Cherry Hill Gourmet, 1901 Emmons Avenue, essentially adding a 10-year term limit for food store use within Area B of the Special Sheets FA District. Attached in your briefing package is a City Council modification letter and a draft letter by the City Planning Commission acknowledging receipt of the recommendation, recommended modification, and determination that the modification is within scope, both from the land use point of view and from environmental review. I'd be happy to answer any questions. Well, I don't know about happy.
We'll start with Ms. Levin, then Ms. DeLuz, then Ms. Efron. Ms. Levin, we'll start with you.
So, yeah, Richard. Is there any place else in the zoning resolution that allows a use and then makes it sunset within the zoning text? I mean, normally this sort of mechanism happens, or this process happens by special permit. Think, for example, of the Madison Square Garden permit, which goes away after 10 years, but there's a mechanism for coming back and allowing the use to continue. So I'm wondering if this is a unique, obviously this is a unique application, but is this a unique device in the zoning resolution? And then my next question is, so what happens after 10 years? Does this then become a legal non-conforming use because it was legalized for 10 years and therefore they get to stay forever? Or is the idea that there would, is this like the snapshot of zoning and the grocery store will disappear?
I'll try to answer both of your questions. Try. To my knowledge, usually a term, and I'm told by our council and by our director of zoning, is usually when something is going to happen in the future. Like with our resiliency text, we initially passed it on a temporary basis before we had a more permanent measure, and there was a sunset provision. Also, years back with e-designations, there was also a similar text. But it's been judged by our council and by our director of zoning as being within scope.
Right.
And we don't have much to say other than to report it. As far as what will happen in 10 years, during, I guess, the hearings, we spoke about landmark special permit, that there's a special permit 74-711. If indeed the applicant wanted to expand, the commission preferred that the applicant come back under those provisions. They could certainly, I guess they could apply to terminate the language, or again, to have a new application to extend the time limit. But no, the use has been written so that the use would terminate. They would not be grandfathered in after 10 years, this location. The language is written such that after 10 years from the effective date of the amendment, the use would terminate. I guess it would be an enforcement issue with the Department of Buildings. So that's the best that I can do to answer your question.
Ms. DeLuz.
I'm just wondering what the term of their lease is relative to the term that's written here.
It's longer than 10 years. There's some conflicting information I received. We received the applicant, the land use attorney, indicated they have about 12 years left, but Mr. Pick had testified that they had about 20 years left in his testimony. So I was going through it, trying to get a sense of that, but it certainly is longer than 10 years.
Ms. Efron.
I just wonder how this affects the bankruptcy proceeding of the middle layer and whether or not there's still time for them to reject the lease, which was some area of concern. have we inadvertently, or is there now a condition where there's a risk for the sub-landlord and therefore there's some financial risk for the applicant?
Yeah, well, I guess I can't really speak to that other than the applicant was in negotiations with the council member and agreed to this provision.
That's helpful to know.
Through the process. And I'm not certain, I have those same questions myself, how the court would deal with this. We're not sure, we'll have to see, I suppose.
Thank you.
Any other questions? So our successors 10 years hence, we'll see Cherry Hill back again,
Bellwether of the community.
seeking relief from this commission. With that, I will ask for a show of hands saying that no further action is required based on the conclusion that this is within scope and does not provide any land use issues. Thank you. That's it.
Thanks, Richard. Commissioners, staff have prepared favorable resolutions for the following on Wednesday, May 20th. We have the Crown Heights North 3 Historic District. Staff has opined that there's no conflict with the zoning resolution, projected public improvements or plans for the area involved. We have the Bridgeview Plaza, which involves a special South Richmond Development District authorization to facilitate commercial use and accessory parking. We have 100 South Bridge Street, which is also a special South Richmond Development District certification to subdivide from one zoning lot into two, and 6650 Highland Boulevard, which also involves a special South Richmond Development District certification to subdivide one existing zoning lot into two.
Could I ask about those last two? The briefing sheets didn't show any response from the community board. Were these referred to the community board, and are they okay by the community board?
Yes. Thank you. As for June 3rd, we have the Newtown Creek East Branch, which is a site selection for a DEP aeration facility. In your packages, you have a letter from DEP as a follow-up to some of the concerns that were raised at the public hearing. Tom is here to walk us through the letter.
It's only relations for 10 years. It's store, but the use, we don't. So, council members, expired.
I was just going to say, it's called term limits. It's a shame because it is so nicely done.
Good afternoon.
Investing in it.
So in the letter received from DEP, they describe the kind of first initial phase of development that they have agreed to with the community, plus the future phase of development where they would be adding additional open space, waterfront public access, if adjoining or neighboring properties along the creek were to provide their own waterfront public access.
Oops.
So you can see on this site plan, this is the area of seating that was agreed to with the community board, and this is the kind of planted area with the meadow mix covering that really acts as a rain garden collecting runoff coming off of the rest of the site, the lower building and storage shed. But what they have said that they would do in the future. Now on this plan, this is very schematic, just a kind of basic graphic representation of what they would need to provide, but it's certainly not the most beautiful final product. It really is just to show that an upland connection running from the street to the waterfront would be provided with a minimum width of about 15 feet, and a waterfront promenade area would also need to be provided with a width of about 12 feet. Now, the upland connection could come from any portion of the seating area, could curve through the site, and similarly, the waterfront promenade area could be treated differently. There could be plantings in between, but there just would need to have these basic components for their waterfront public access. At the end, we'll take questions.
I thought you were done. I'm sorry.
Oh no, I got got a little bit left. There was mentioned at the hearing of talks with a local athletic group that was interested in having a soccer field on the area. In the letter, they reiterated that it really wasn't a great option for this site. There would need to be substantial grading to make a playing field that would be level, and it would be a very small site. There was the interest in if any stewardship groups would be willing to take on the site. DEP said again at their testimony and in the letter that they weren't aware of any groups that would be able to take on the site at this time. Plus, with both of these issues, they're still concerned that there wouldn't be enough eyes on the space at all times, so it would still be an attractive nuisance. And to add to that point, they are still working on their long-term control plan and the Superfund status of Newtown Creek itself. So portions of the site may need to be used for additional facilities that would work on the remediation of the creek itself. So they really aren't able to provide any additional public access on the site to the planted area at this time. There will be a gate that can be opened, but it's really only for service and personnel. They will work with DC on signage to describe the facility itself. And in the event that public access is provided on the site, there will be signage to say that the fish should be not eaten if caught. Any further questions?
Any questions? Ms. Levin. Ms. Cantor.
Tom, if they were to be providing what the on the books waterfront public access rules would require a shore public walkway that's significantly larger than this, correct?
Yes. Well,
Wider.
It would be wide, the actual access area, not necessarily the pathway itself, but the planted area would be wider. But since they wouldn't necessarily be placing anything else on the site, it could take up the entire section, but it would be about probably 20 to 30, 40 feet in width, coming to about this point.
Right. Well, so I guess, I'd really like to be sure that our action here amply documents their commitment to making this available for waterfront access if the neighboring sites become available. I mean, I accept the argument that now is not the time. But I don't think we ought to be doing anything in this action that precludes it from becoming a walkway. And so, I mean, ordinarily I would like to see the building moved back further so that there is more space so that it could eventually be built according to zoning. And so that's one issue, which I don't think we're probably going to solve here, but is a concern that we're not really properly planning for the future. And secondly, I would like the commitment to DEP's commitment to provide waterfront access in the future, at least in the papers that we have, is really only in the mayoral zoning override request. I hope it can be really clear from our report that they did make that commitment in the course of all of this, because it'll be up to some future community to look at the legislative history here and be able to go back to DEP and say, you know what, guys, this is what you promised and now's the time.
It is spelled out very clearly in the ULURP itself, as well as the environmental for it, but we can make
Let's be sure it's in our report.
We shall put it in the report. As for the connection, right, under the zoning, it would be required to have a full waterfront connection. However, because of the nature of the ducting running into the creek itself, there was a concern about if you could provide public access across where the actual piping is running out of the facility. So this kind of light area here that's about 50 by 18, I believe is going to be a combination of concrete panel that can be lifted and grading. So it wouldn't really necessarily lend itself to being crossed by any public access. but they wanted to keep the building to the side because of the grade. The grade slopes slightly. It needed to be placed here because this is where the existing riprap on the site is. There's actually 2 levels of concrete bulkheading through. So really, all the site conditions really force everything into this corner.
Okay, so in fact, there won't be a future shore public walkway, are you saying?
Oh, no. There could be a future shore public walkway.
Yeah, but but continuing up?
It would not be able to be continuous across.
Ever?
Ever.
Well, that's kind of a bummer. That's really a bummer.
Ms. Cantor.
And further to Lenon's question, you're talking about grading, you're talking about removing the panels, so why can't you have public access except when they need to get into the hole?
Okay, I can ask. That was when we were in talks with them originally, that was the response that we were given, that it wouldn't be possible.
Yeah.
There's absolutely no reason why you can't have removable panels and we can have public access. And I'm sure I have concern with regard to 12, 10, or whatever feet normally expected from the front. I think we should get the security system. The other question on the path is, who's maintaining that area?
DEP would be maintaining it. Well, for the first year, it would be the contractor who actually did the construction, and then it would fall under DEP jurisdiction.
The reason for my question is, if I understand the grasses that you're talking about, they grow pretty fast and hard.
I believe they come about knee-high. I believe so. That's how it was described to us. It's a meadow mix, short grasses, some flowering, but it wouldn't be particularly tall.
Ms. Efron.
Thanks. Could you explain where the fence is in attachment 1 and what kind of fence it is? Because it looks like it's right up against the benches. So will anyone sitting there be able to actually see the meadow grass, or will it be a dense fence?
I believe it
like
would
a
just be
gate?
a standard hurricane fence running kind of along the back. There's a space between the bench, just along. So it should be fairly transparent. It would be able to see out.
Could we state that or make it clear that the meadow grass is only relevant if people can actually
View
enjoy
it.
it?
Sure.
Any other questions, Tom? Thank you, Tom.
Let's now move to 41 Great Jones Street. Let's have our first post-hearing follow-up conversation to be led by Joel. You have certain materials in your packages from the applicant and others with respect to this project. So, Joel, take it.
All right, good afternoon. So in your packages, you have a letter from the applicant, and you also have some correspondence from the borough president to follow up on the questions that were raised at the public hearing, which was on May 6th. So the letter from the applicant, that provides a further explanation of how this project meets the findings of section 74-711, and that is for the proposal to have a minimal adverse effects on the uses within the building and on the uses within the surrounding area. So the letter states that, again, as the applicant discussed, as the entire building is going to be residential use, that there will be no minimal adverse effects on that residential use within the building, because it will be one single use. The letter also goes on to describe the mixed-use character of the NoHo neighborhood and cites a few both City Planning Commission applications and BSA applications that allowed for residential use in the neighborhood. In addition, the letter outlines a history of tenancy within the building and states that the 3rd through 5th floors are not required to be rent stabilized. Part of this argument that the applicant has crafted is references something called a piano case, This is a legal case, and according to the applicant, this case determined that for buildings with fewer than 6 units that are rent stabilized only through the loft law, that the units within them are not required to be rent stabilized once those fixtures have been sold. So your applicant also includes a summary of correspondence between the borough president and the loft board, and also a joint letter from Manhattan Borough President and Councilmember Chin has been distributed to you. We received that at the end of the day on Friday. So in these documents, both the borough president and the council members state that based on their conversations with the loft board, that they believe the units on the 3rd and 5th floor are required to be rent stabilized. And Department of City Planning staff has reached out to the loft board to talk with them about this and gain further clarification. We hope to receive formal documentation from the loft board on this, and if and when we do, we will share that with you all.
Questions?
When do we have to vote on this? I'm sorry.
It's typically scheduled for June 3rd, but there is additional time,
Yeah, the deadline is the 29th.
so there's
I think we have one more.
Yeah, I think this probably will not be voted on June 3rd, that there are a lot of questions still outstanding. We have correspondence from the loft board yet to be received. Staff is also talking to state DHCR about coverage beyond the loft board.
Great.
This will not be voted on the 3rd.
Yeah.
Ms. Levin?
Yeah, it strikes me from reading the applicant's response letter, which I actually found, quite thorough and carefully put together. There's some very interesting history there. We've all been floundering around with this language for a long time, and for me, having I suppose we could have all gone and found it ourselves, but finding the legislative history of the language of 74-711 was very helpful. It really, highlights the extent to which these zoning provisions were put in place at a different time against a different set of planning issues. I think the core of the applicant's argument about 74-711 is that there already was a planning assumption built in that alternate uses could be appropriate, and that you go to the LPC for the preservation side of the analysis, and then when you get to us, it's really just about the adverse effects on other uses in the building or the area. Well, I guess I would have a legal question for city planning staff about whether that, what city planning's reaction is to the arguments framed in the applicant's letter, because I think they do put together a pretty complete and compelling argument for their side of this. Is there anything else that the staff would like to advise us on that legal front? And then on the loft board question, we really have inconsistent lines of argument. One, again, well thought out, well articulated from the applicant and from the loft board and the borough president. City council member correspondent, and here we have the chair who's got a little more experience with the loft board. They're just two inconsistent pieces of advice.
There are two
So what are we to do?
different strains here. One is the use issue, and the other is the coverage under rent stabilization. I would just start by saying that, just going back to our discussion earlier and Commissioner Dweck's question, we know that the zoning scheme in Soho and NoHo is something that we really have to take a look at, and for this and many reasons is a little awkward in terms of modern day land use. On the first issue you raise, which is the question of use, it's and staff did have quite a thorough and wide-ranging conversation on that issue. It's a question of to what extent public policy in this area is recognizes the rehabilitation of landmarks and historic buildings ought to predominate over other land use considerations. I mean, that's the basic question. I think the default position is that the purpose of 74-711 is that absent compelling reasons not to, that the purpose is to have landmark rehabilitation and historic buildings predominate. But that's still a question that has been a subject of lively discussion among the staff. With respect to the rent stabilization issue, I think the issue so far is, I think, somewhat less in dispute, given even, albeit the applicant's persuasive arguments, given what the loft board's view of this is, and I go back a very long way and was involved in drafting of 7C. So, and what how the state views it. And I'd say the piano decision that Joel referenced was a building where indeed there were. It's not that the holding was that if there were fewer than 6 units, it didn't qualify. It was rather that in the piano case, as I understand it, the building did have more than 6 units, and consequently, it was never in doubt.
Right.
So, I think if they had come to a different conclusion, the case might, if it was a building with fewer than 6 units, and the court had ruled that rent stabilization didn't apply, it's not inconceivable that an appeal would have been taken from that. So I think that's where it stands at the moment. Joel should correct me if I said anything.
No,
that's
all right.
What?
That's all right. I'll correct.
You can correct me if I'm
No.
But there's still a little more work to be done, and
Yeah.
we do want to get something definitive from the loft board and something, if possible, definitive from DHCR as well. Any other questions?
Thank you.
Okay, so we'll come back in 2 weeks to discuss this project. And on June 3rd, just to continue, we have 375 Pearl Street, NYPD office space, 90 West Street, NYPD office space, which were presented earlier today. And we have the Brooklyn Public Library designation in Community Board, Community District 16 in Brooklyn. And I believe that concludes our agenda.
Any other questions or comments or thoughts before we adjourn for the day? If not, I will see you on Wednesday. Thank you very much.
Thank you. See you. Thank you.
Well,
Hey, look. That's great. Thank you. That's great.
What are we going to do with all this?
And I feel better that I didn't notice.